trees were all dying. There were two large, I would say probably equivalent to two-story pine trees in the back, a large oak that overhang over my rooftop. And I was so concerned that I couldn't leave for 4th of July, I couldn't leave for New Year's, because I was always afraid that these trees would just go up like matches. And not only that, but the concern every night going to bed, is this the day the tree is going to fall? It was so much anxiety on my part to have to deal with that. And when my children were home, we'd go through a drill to say, okay, if we hear something, take cover. And that's not the right way to live.
The property that came to our attention through the fire chief, there was a lot of concern from the community for not only fire, because this house was completely overgrown with vegetation and debris that was mixed into the vegetation, a lot of dead, decaying branches and leaves. And it also had several very large trees that could fall. So neighbors were super concerned about this basically being a tinderbox that could go up, but also the trees could fall at any time as well.
Everything was all dry. I would look over the fence and there would be shrubs up to probably my hip. And I couldn't see the ground. I could not see the ground at all. In the valley here, the heat gets really bad. And, obviously fire is a big concern, which is why I was constantly in communication with the fire department. They would come, they would listen to me. I would send them pictures. I'd always take pictures over the fence and or in the front of the house and send them over. But there was not much they could do, is what their response was to me.
I was able to go out and take a look at the property prior to us accepting the receivership. And what I immediately noticed was it was just a jungle. There was a fairly late model SUV that was non-operational in the driveway, and it was carpeted in debris, and it had a tree with branches that were pushing up against it. And that wouldn't normally be so concerning, except for notice that it also had a trickle charger on the battery. So now in this yard that is very much a fire danger, you also have an electrical cord that's going out to this car. I was there at the appointment hearing. We got appointed. And immediately, same day, I was coordinating with members of the CRG team to put together a first day of inspection. And that can be really important, is how you go in the very first day. So we were able to assess it completely at that time. I still was hoping to reach the owner, because communication is key in our job. I had not met him yet, but I had gotten a full description about him. Our director of security noticed somebody a couple blocks away who had started to walk toward the house and had then stopped and stared for a while and then started walking down another street. It seemed like it was him to me, but I wasn't sure. I actually got into my car, drove over next to the gentleman, and when I was close enough to him, I did recognize that it had to be him from the description. And I addressed him. I think he was very nervous because he saw that there were so many people at his house, but I was actually able to reassure him of the reason that we were there. We were there because we cared about the safety of the community, and that included him. He was living in a house that was very dangerous, and we're there to assess it and work it out. I talked him into being able to come back to the property where he could discuss it further with us. He shared with us that he had actually had suffered from some fairly serious medical issues, and he was just very overwhelmed. And at the end of the conversation, it switched from him being nervous to him actually telling us that he was actually reassured that we were finally going to address something that had been really concerning him too.
In court is when we met the California Receivership. I hadn't even a clue that there was such an organization. Within 3 weeks, I believe, we had some action. And I was very pleased. And just the sense of relief knowing that those trees were going to come down. There were some days that were really windy, and I was kind of, maybe I should text Pierce and see if he can move faster. But I just kind of let things work, and it was very peaceful and very calm, very professional. And I think our neighbor was treated with utmost respect, and so I'm really glad that there is a group that can help with neighbors' properties that fall in disarray. And it's been very relaxing, very smooth. can't think of another word, but just very smooth, and everybody's been in communication with me.
On this property, logistics was very important. The trees were the most immediate danger, but we could not just access the trees without actually taking care of the overgrowth and debris that prevented any access to them and remove a lot of the dilapidated little structures like the gazebo, a spa deck. So we had to remove that. I brought in a couple of tree companies and we decided on one that had the most experience and was a local company and assessed it with them and realized that the access to his backyard where we would have to go to remove the trees would not work. There was not enough room to bring in the equipment. Through working with one of the neighbors, we were able to gain that access through his yard, to be able to get the access to the property, to the trees. And then that involved now removing the trees, which some of them were in such a perilous state that they had to go all the way to the top and slowly remove them. You couldn't just knock them down or they would fall where you don't want them to fall, especially the really large oak tree that was overhanging the owner's property. And if it had fallen, it would have just obliterated the house. They wound up doing literally a zip line from the top of the oak tree to the front yard. So going from the backyard to the front yard, zip lining branches that were sometimes as heavy as 1,000 pounds over the house, but doing it very safely. And that was a really interesting and fantastic approach.
It was quite the excitement on the block. The oak was just enormous, and so little by little they cut it back. They had a zip line down to the mulcher, and by the time they got done, we had several neighbors out watching. It was entertainment for the block, and they just kind of took it back little by little. It was just very professional. I would say probably a handful of branches ended up in my yard, and we share a fence. So they knocked on the door and they asked if they can come and clean up. So I went and checked, and there was absolutely nothing that we couldn't handle ourselves, and we just commended that team for doing such an excellent job.
I know that actually a lot of people, including the owner, gathered on the street to watch that process with other neighbors. That was even part of the start of neighbors coming together and talking, because this owner had been estranged from his neighbors. He is now on a talking basis with his neighbors. He sits out in his yard a lot. He's putting in a garden. It's a very good outcome. Each receivership property is different. It's always a balancing act. This was a case where obviously we wanted to take care of the health and safety issues, but that also wound up taking care of the people, which is the person that was living in this property, that was living in danger, that was overwhelmed, that wasn't able to address it himself. We were able to do that with him, had great communication with him, and developed a plan with him where he will be able to stay in this home. And so now he's going to stay in a home that's a lot safer, and he's going to have more communication and interaction with his neighbors. And that's just something that makes me feel really good. I'm proud of the work that we've done here.
I can sleep at night, and it's just nice to know that our neighbor's okay, that his property is now maintained. We, we take value, we take ownership in our properties, and we don't want anybody's property to go in disarray, much less the person. So that's the kind of neighborhood we are.
A lot of the work we do is in cooperation with members of the community and departments in the community. In this case, we were working very closely with the fire department, the police department, code enforcement, and even the building department. And working with all these individuals that really care about their community and were so willing to help with what needed to be done just made this a much smoother process. It is a team effort.